Dear students, let us start our second part of the lesson, in which you will learn formulation of null and alternative hypothesis, calculation of test statistic and obtaining the critical values. Deciding whether to accept or reject a statement is called a hypothesis. The decision making procedure for the hypothesis is called hypothesis testing. Usually you will be writing a statement and you are able to suggest that the statement is true or false. When you are moving towards a statement where you are not able to decide whether it is right or wrong, then you are entering into the concept of hypothesis. Some examples: a drug chemist is to decide whether a new drug is effective in curing a disease. As you know that when you have been taking a medicine, you will be deciding about how it will works, whether before the treatment, after the treatment, how it has been working. Similarly, a quality control manager will determine whether the process is working properly. As you know, in a quality, that is in a preparing a product, every time you will be having at least 4 to 5 different parts. Among them, the process is working properly or not can be managed by the statistician. A statistician can also decide whether a coin is biased. Then you will come out for procedure for testing a hypothesis. You have some steps to follow. First, you need to define your problem, what you are going to do. That is, you have to identify your problem clearly. Then you have to frame the null hypothesis, then definitely alternative hypothesis. Then you have to fix your level of significance and degrees of freedom. Test statistic, what type of test you are going to choose, and finally you are going to infer your results. Now you will be coming to the one by one. The first one, null hypothesis, which represented as H naught. A null hypothesis is a hypothesis asserting that there is no significant difference between the statistic and parameter. Whatever the observed difference is, it is simply due to variations in the population's sampling. Here the null hypothesis will speaks about the difference, that is a neutrality between the statistic and parameter. That is, as you have been mentioned in our previous lesson, that x bar will be our sample mean, mu will be our population mean. Where there is no difference between them has been speaking about null hypothesis. Similarly, you will be going for alternative hypothesis H1. Any hypothesis which contradicts the null hypothesis we called an alternative hypothesis. While going for this alternative hypothesis, you need to be concentrated on whether you are moving towards a one-tailed or two-tailed test here. That is, you can see this is a normal curve, and you can see this blue color shaded, both the ends will called as the tails. If it has been shaded for both the ends, you can call it as an two-tailed. If it is shaded at only one end, you can call it as a one-tailed. So how we can classify this one-tailed and two-tailed? As a picture you are understanding, as a sentence how we can see. Now we can see here, two-tailed test will be that no direction, that is you have been simply specifying that not equal as like. But whereas in a one-tailed test you have been specifying clearly that greater than, less than, or simply I can say that a comparative statement. Now level of significance alpha, the maximum possible probability with which we are willing to risk an error in rejecting H naught when it is true. The default value will be 1%, 5% and 10%. You can see in a level of significance, I can make you with a simple example, as a student will decide about his marks that he will secure 85 in the exam. That is, he is committing his risk towards that 15 marks he is going to lose. Similarly, in every product they may not assure 100% quality or 100% result in them, as like in 99.9% can be possible. Now coming to the degrees of freedom, the number of independent or explanatory variables which make up the statistic is known as degrees of freedom. It is a number that indicates how many values of a variable may be independently or freely chosen. Let us go with some example. With a number you can understand clearly. If you have to choose any 4 numbers, I asked you to choose, you will choose any 4 numbers, as like I have been chosen here 11, 6, 14, 28. You can choose any 4. Now we impose a restriction on these numbers, say the sum should be 50. Now you have to select the 4 numbers, the total should be 50. Now the first 3 numbers can be chosen freely, the last 4th number is such that the sum should be 50. It means that your 4th number has been losing its freedom. It means that 4 minus 1, that is 3 degrees of freedom. Now coming to the next test statistic. In hypothesis testing, a test statistic is a numerical value calculated from the sample data used to assess the strength of evidence against a null hypothesis. The choice of test statistic depends on the nature of the data and specification of hypothesis, as one-tailed or two-tailed, or comparatively between the population parameter and statistic, which decides. After identifying the suitable test statistic, we can obtain the calculated value using the test statistic formula. Then for every test we have a standard table value, as like a t-test table value, chi-square table value, from which we can obtain the table value, or you can call it as a critical value with alpha % level of significance, as I mentioned 5, 10 or 1. The inference can be obtained from the above comparison by whether it is accepting the H0 or rejecting. Students, now we come to the end of part 2 of this lesson. We have learnt how to frame a null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis, and we have been verified with the procedure how to follow this testing of hypothesis. I am confident that you understood all the concepts which have been covered in this part 2. We will continue in the next video. Thank you.